I had been using the Tinder app for months, scrolling through faces framed with smiles, half-hearted poses, and a few overly filtered selfies, hoping to find someone, anyone, who could pull me out of my endless routine. But it was the evening when I stumbled upon his profile that everything changed forever. His name was Jake. The first picture that caught my eye showed him grinning by a campfire, the flames dancing with a warm glow. The second struck me with its raw intensity, a close-up of him, eyes like storm clouds staring straight through the camera, as if he could see all my fears. I swiped right, heart racing, as if he were an elixir for my stagnant life. As the days progressed, we exchanged texts that danced in and out of flirtation and casual conversation. Jake was charming, magnetic even, but there was something dark lurking beneath the surface. He often mentioned his fascination with the macabre, citing ghost stories and true crime podcasts as his favorite pastimes. I found it intriguing at first, but unease would prick at my thoughts like a thorn whenever I considered the details he shared. The way he spoke of the thrill of the hunt, dark, twisted tales that made my skin crawl, was both enticing and terrifying. A week after our first match, he suggested we meet for drinks at a dive bar on the outskirts of town. I hesitated, intuition gnawed at my gut. Darkness seemed to seep from his messages, but in a moment of weakness, I brushed it aside. What harm could one night do? My heart raced as I prepped for the date, conflicted emotions swirling together. The bar was dimly lit, with old rock music humming through the speakers, setting a gritty atmosphere. I arrived early to settle my nerves, but as the minutes stretched into a half hour, my excitement was overshadowed by anxiety. When I finally spotted him at the entrance, my breath caught in my throat. He appeared even more magnetic in person, but something sinister flickered behind his eyes. "Hey, sorry I'm late," I stuttered when he approached, unable to form a proper smile. "Don't worry about it, you're here now." He leaned in, a warm yet chilling presence. "I can't wait to get to know you better." We sank into a booth, and as drinks flowed, the conversation swirled into darker waters. Jake spoke about the thrill of fear, the rush of adrenaline, about how we all had monsters lurking in our minds that we had to confront. He leaned closer, and I could smell the faint trace of danger in the air, like burnt matches and raw meat. I should have left then and there, but I was captivated, entangled in his web of charisma and danger. Hours slipped by, and with each drink, I found myself drawn deeper. He told me unsettling stories, an obsessed stalker, a murder in our very city, the way people can change behind closed doors. The more Jake spoke, the more I felt the walls of the bar begin to close in around me. There was a wild glint in his eyes, almost as if he were daring me to step closer to the edge. "Tell me, what scares you the most?" he asked suddenly, lifting his gaze as if he were testing my limits. "Losing control," I replied, surprised by my own honesty. "Not being able to escape a situation when it turns dark." Jake grinned, but there was no warmth in it. "You never know what you're capable of until you're tested." We finished our drinks, but as the night wore on, I could no longer ignore the urgency in my gut. I excused myself, mumbling that I needed to check on a friend. I made my way to the restroom, my heart racing with unease. Inside the dimly lit stall, I took a moment to breathe, splashing water on my face. But before I could find my composure, I overheard snippets of hushed conversation from the next stall over. "Did he find her yet?" one voice murmured, low and conspiratorial. "No, but the hunt is thrilling. We can't stop now, we took the bait," another voice replied, filled with sinister excitement. Fear gripped me as I processed their words. I wasn't just a girl on a date, was I the bait? I unlocked the stall and peeked cautiously outside, scanning the empty restroom, heart hammering in my chest. I had to get out. Rushing back to the booth, my blood ran cold. Jake was gone. The faint glow from his phone illuminated the table, showing several missed notifications. I grabbed my bag and hurried outside, my instincts screaming at me to flee. The streets felt hostile in the darkness, the shadows stretching as the moon glared down like a watchful eye. The night was suffocating, and every rustle made my heart race. I turned the corner when a figure loomed ahead, too familiar, too close. It was Jake, leaning against his car, looking like a predator waiting for his prey. "There you are," he said, voice smooth and steady, chilling my blood. "I thought you ran off. Where are you going?" "I need to call my friend," I stammered, fumbling with my phone, desperately pressed against the unyielding dread coursing through me. "Why don't I help you with that?" His voice turned darker, almost gleeful, as he took a step closer, eyes gleaming with a feral intent. I turned to run, the thumping of my heart echoing like a drum in my ears. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest street filled with flickering lights and oversized signs. People, music, life, and yet, I felt so utterly exposed. I glanced behind me, panting. He was still coming, but now he was moving swiftly, the same twisted enjoyment apparent on his face. I ducked into a nearby cafe, hoping the mundane atmosphere would shield me, but I knew it was only temporary. As I sat hidden in the back, frantically texting a friend to call the police, I could hear him enter, the bell chiming lightly above the door. "Where did you go, Emma?" His voice slid through the air like poison. "I just wanted to show you something special." I was frozen, pulse echoing in my ears as I scanned for a way out. The staff was oblivious, moving about their tasks, blissfully unaware of the nightmare lurking just behind the corner of the counter. Not allowing panic to overtake me, I rose slowly, inching toward the exit, silently praying for a distraction. And then the bell chimed again, but this time it was accompanied by voices. 2 officers stepped inside, their uniforms bright against the dimly lit cafe. "Stop right there," one of them shouted, spotting Jake as he turned toward me, rage flashing behind his predatory gaze. Before he could react, officers restrained him. I watched, breathless, as they collared him, the darkness that had enveloped me finally slowly lifting. The adrenaline surged in waves, clean and liberating. Wordlessly, I turned to the officers, the horror of the night pounding against my chest. They soon ushered me aside, taking my statement, the nightmare of Jake pressing deeper into memory. Only then did I find the strength to breathe. I didn't need Tinder to find excitement anymore, it was a reminder of how quickly things could devolve into chaos. As I stepped outside into the world beyond, I knew something had shifted within me, a raw resilience forged from fear, a lesson learned in the most gruesome of ways. The app would stay on my phone, but it would never taste another swipe again.
I was never one to be easily spooked by the tales my friends spun about dating apps. I viewed them as vessels of modern romance or, at least, temporary distractions while I searched for something real. Tinder was the latest fad, and I used it on a whim one rainy Saturday evening, binging on wine while swiping through faces both familiar and unsettling. Match. It was a phrase I had grown to love, as each swipe drew me into a game that felt both exhilarating and oddly shallow. That night, my screen lit up with a message that made my heart skip. "Let's meet at the Holloway?" It was an upscale hotel just a few blocks from my apartment and an enticing pick for an adventurous first date. I debated for a moment, looking at the picture of my match. His name was Leo, a brooding figure with striking blue eyes and a sly smile. It was the kind of face that commanded attention, yet there was something about it that unnerved me, a predatory glint mixed with a dark intensity I couldn't quite place. I shook off the hesitation. I was seeking an exciting fling, and he certainly fit the bill. The atmosphere in the Holloway was thick with tension and lavish decor that felt like a throwback to a forgotten era. I glanced around the hotel's lobby, catching the faint echo of laughter and clink of glasses in the upscale bar nearby. My heartbeat quickened. Was I doing the right thing? I found myself seated in an extravagant suite room. The air was perfumed with an intoxicating blend of cedar and sandalwood, and the soft golden lighting cast a warm glow that made the surroundings feel both inviting and eerie. I admired the plush bedding, the extravagant paintings, and the faint sound of distant thunder rumbling outside, an omen I chose to ignore. After a few minutes of anxious fidgeting, there was a knock at the door. Leo stood there, looking even more alluring than his profile suggested, dressed in a tailored black suit that seemed to hug his body perfectly. He had an air about him, a mixture of charm and danger, and I felt the hairs on my neck stand up. I shook off the feeling, trying my hardest to remain composed. "Hey there," he said, flashing that devil-may-care smile. "Glad you could join me." We made small talk, and I didn't hold back my laughter as he recounted tales that danced between surreal and ridiculous. But as the hour passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that the conversation was woven too closely into something darker. Then Leo leaned closer, his breath warming my ear. "Is there a part of you that craves something darker? Something deeper?" The way he whispered the words sent a ripple through me, a mix of excitement and fear. My playful demeanor faltered, but I concealed it behind a teasing smile. "What do you mean?" His reply was chilling in its simplicity. "We are all monsters waiting to be released. Don't pretend you don't feel it." The air thickened around me, and I began to see the room differently, the shadows flickering from the candlelight casting twisted shapes on the wall. The excitement that had propelled me here began to curdle into something unrecognizable. My gut screamed for me to leave. Maybe I should. Before I could finish, Leo grasped my wrist, his fingers cool against my skin. I looked up and locked eyes with him, those blue hues penetrating me with an intensity that fueled a primal instinct to flee. "In a hurry?" he teased, but the tightness in his grip made my skin crawl. My mouth felt dry. Just. The sudden sound of the storm outside grew more violent. A flash of lightning illuminated the room, and for just a moment, I thought I saw something behind him, an indistinct shadow lurking in the corner. I blinked, and it was gone. "Stay with me," he said softly, a hint of impatience creeping into his voice. "We haven't even started yet." "What do you mean? Don't you want to know my secret?" He leaned closer, and I felt the weight of his gaze. "You and I. We could discover what lies beneath the surface. It's the thrill of it all." The world spun and the air turned stale. The gravity of his proposition tugged at dark corners of my mind. I longed to both flee and succumb to uncharted territories of desire. With a sudden spark, a voice inside whispered at my bravado. Yet, dread seeped into my veins, cooling me. "Leo, I don't." That's when it happened. The lights flickered and the shadows danced with an almost chaotic fervor. Behind Leo, I saw a figure emerge, faint but undeniably present. It stood in the corner of the room, grotesque and visceral, eyes hollow, teeth sharp. I yanked my wrist free. I need to go." But Leo laughed, cruel, primal, echoing like thunder. "You can't leave. The night is only beginning." His body shifted, and to my horror, the figure took form, merging with him. A monstrous, insatiable shadow draped itself over him, a ghastly reflection of my darkest fears. I backed away, scrambling for the door, but it swung shut on its own. Trapped. The walls seemed to close in, accented by the chaotic rumble of thunder outside. I could hear it now, a cacophony of whispers drifting from the corner. "You thought it was just a date," Leo's voice mocked as he stepped closer, the shadows swirling around him. "But you invited it in. You wanted the darkness, didn't you?" With every ounce of strength, I charged toward the door, momentarily blanketed by disbelief and pure terror as I twisted the knob wildly. The darkness encroached from the edges, reaching out for me with icy tendrils. In a final surge, I flung myself into the hallway. Breathless, I stumbled into the elevator, pressing the button frantically. I felt a surge of heat against my back, a suffocating presence just behind me. But as the doors slid shut, I could still hear Leo's laughter echoing through the hotel corridors, a promise of horrors yet to come. I escaped that night, but deep down, I knew there was a shadow trailing me, one that could only emerge when summoned. The whispers from the app had beckoned something in me, my desire for something deeper had given birth to my undoing. I would never delete Tinder, but I would never forget that night at the Holloway, an experience that stripped away the charming facade of modern romance, unveiling the dark abyss beneath it. In a world of masks and unseen entities, could any connection truly be worth the horror hidden behind a match?
I never thought a dating app would lead me down a path of horror, but here I am, sitting on my couch with what feels like frostbite creeping up my spine. It started innocently enough, just another Friday night spent scrolling through my phone, swiping left and right like a mindless automaton. My friends had convinced me to give Love Links a try, a relatively new platform that promised to match you based on more than just superficial bios and pictures. After repeated pestering and a couple of cocktails, I joined it, eager to find a spark in the dimmed glow of my apartment. The first few matches were typical, awkward conversations, obnoxious pickup lines, and too many selfies in front of bathroom mirrors. Most of them were easily dismissed, but there was one profile that stood out, a girl named Astra. Her bio was intriguing, consisting of vague poetry and a fascination with the unknown. She wasn't a textbook beauty, with her wild, unruly hair and dark, piercing eyes, but there was something about her that drew me in. It's hard to explain. It was as if she were looking through me rather than at me. Our initial exchanges danced somewhere between flirtatious and cryptic. She spoke in metaphors, often referencing shadows and light, life and death. I found it charming until it began to take a sinister turn. Patterns emerged in our chats that unnerved me. Frequent mentions of the whispers in the walls and the eyes that watch from the darkness. I wanted to throw away my phone, yet I couldn't resist her allure. And with each conversation, I felt something inside me shift, a slow, creeping invasion of this surreal world she occupied. After weeks of relentless messaging, Astra suggested we meet. My heart raced at the thought, and despite the morbid undertones of our conversations, my curiosity overshadowed my fear. We agreed to meet at a local coffee shop, promising each other an afternoon of delight and intrigue. I texted a couple of friends about it, but they urged me to be cautious, warning that online encounters could be dangerous. I pushed their concerns aside. I felt that I knew Astra like a long-lost friend. The day of our meeting felt electric. I donned my favorite shirt and splashed on some cologne, hardly able to contain my anticipation. As I arrived at the cafe, it was filled with the usual suspects: college students, busy couples, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. But I felt a sense of disconnection as I scanned the room. Astra was nowhere to be found. Minutes ticked by, and my excitement dwindled to a sense of dread. I texted her and received no reply. An hour passed, and I was about to leave when she finally appeared in the doorway. She looked different, though. The light behind her seemed to dim as she stepped inside. Her expression was vacant, and her hair hung over her face, obscuring her features. "Astra?" I called tentatively. She raised her head slowly, and my heart sank. Her eyes were wide and uninhabited, and her mouth twisted into an unsettling smile. "You came." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it enveloped me like fog on a summer morning. "Of course," I said, forcing a smile that felt like a mask. I gestured toward the nearest table, trying to find comfort in the familiar surroundings. But the moment we sat down, an oppressive silence enveloped us. I wanted to break it, but a primal instinct told me not to provoke whatever was happening. "Do you hear them?" she asked suddenly, her eyes glazing over. "The whispers? They always come when the shadows grow long." Unease coiled in my stomach, but I played along. "What whispers?" She leaned in closer, the scent of decay wafting from her. They tell me things, secrets about the world, about us. They warned me you'd come. Warning? I chuckled nervously. About what? Her gaze turned sharp, and all at once, I felt exposed. About your darkness, how it attracts more darkness. My pulse quickened as I realized what was happening. She was no longer the girl I had been texting. I was talking to something else now, something that draped itself in her skin. I think I should go, I said, pushing my chair back. But she laughed, a chilling sound that sent electric shocks down my spine. You can't leave. They won't let you. They like you. Cold sweat broke out along my forehead. What do you mean? Who won't let me? The ones who watch. The shadows behind her contorted, becoming something alive and threatening in the corner of my eye. I glanced away, and when I turned back, her face was inches from mine, her eyes blacker than any night. Panic surged through me as I stood and backed away, stumbling toward the exit while she remained seated, her laughter haunting me, echoing off the cafe's walls. But the coffee shop was no longer a refuge. The walls seemed to pulse, and the other patrons were now blurs of senseless movement, their laughter morphed into droning whispers. I shoved the door open, racing out into the cool evening air, desperately trying to shake off whatever horror had just unfolded. I didn't stop until I reached my apartment, locking the door behind me as if it could keep the darkness at bay. Yet that night, the whispers began. It started as a soft murmur, just a little voice in the corner of my mind that I could almost convince myself was my imagination. But as days passed, those whispers grew louder, punctuated by the feeling of being watched. I would catch fleeting shadows out of the corner of my eye and hear a dark laughter echoing through empty rooms. My phone buzzed endlessly with messages from Astra, her words now consisting of cryptic warnings. You shouldn't have run. They are angry now, they read. They're getting closer. Desperation clawed at me. I deleted the app, blocked her number, but the weight of the shadows grew unbearable. It's been a week since she invited me to a meeting that would forever change my life. I sit here now, in a pitch-black room illuminated only by a faint screen, trembling as the whispers continue, swirling through the darkness, telling me things only they know. As the last flicker of light dims, and I feel the heavy eyes closing in on me, I understand. I have become part of the very shadows Astra spoke of, and in this darkness, I'm not alone.